When Susan receives the MAGPIE Murders manuscript, she comments,
"Very Agatha Christie."
Very Agatha Christie. While that is a wink toward the obvious Hercule Poirot-inspired character of Atticus Pund, it's also a knowing wink toward the solution. Alan Conway's mystery has the same whodunit plotting as an Agatha Christie novel. How did Dame Agatha Christie trick so many readers? She led the readers to assume things that were incorrect. As a reader, you'd think the murder occurred after midnight, when it actually happened before midnight. You'd think a suspect was injured and couldn't have walked hundreds of yards to commit the murder, but they weren't actually injured. You'd think the husband loved his mistress and hated his wife, but he was sick of his mistress and still in love with his wife. Why would readers assume those wrong things? Often because Agatha Christie would have her narrators, like Captain Hastings, lead the reader to wrong assumptions. If Susan Ryland is our narrator, what is Susan assuming that's wrong? How are Susan's assumptions leading you astray? Let's solve MAGPIE Murders, Season 1, Episode 2. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on our hunt to learn who killed Alan Conway and who killed Mary Blakiston. Oh yeah, who chopped off Sir Magnus Pye's head? Spoilers for the first 2 episodes of MAGPIE Murder. If you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, pause this video, watch the episode, and then do what you do. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please slice that like button. Like it's Sir Magnus's head. If you're listening to this podcast on an app like Apple Podcast or Spotify, please subscribe and leave a review. Later on, we'll bring on our internet detective who's watched the first 2 episodes but has not read the book, has no spoilers, has no idea who killed Alan Conway or who committed the MAGPIE Murders, if there were MAGPIE Murders. Before we run down the suspects, let's look at what Episode 2 taught us about our victim, author Alan Conway. Alan's lawyer said Alan's books always kept you guessing right up until the very end. Alan named his house Abbey Grange after a Sherlock Holmes short story, and that house is the basis for Pye Hall in his novel MAGPIE Murders. Now, Alan was in the closet. He didn't admit that he was gay until after he and James had been together a couple of years. In fact, Alan was still married to his wife when he started seeing James. According to James, Alan put everyone he knew into his books, and not in a nice way. He liked to play with people. Writing was all a game to Alan, and words were a game. His computer password is catupnudist, which is an anagram of Atticus Pund. It's important to note that James knew that password. Alan wrote his first draft of his novels by hand, and as we mentioned before, he liked those expensive pens. Now, all of his notes are gone. People mention that Alan hated being a successful writer. It made him rich, but it didn't make him happy. When Alan was a teacher, the students didn't like him because he was strict. And as the saying goes, everyone who read Alan Conway loved him. Everyone who met him did not. Now let's look at the suspects in the real-life mystery of Alan Conway's death. There's Susan Ryland, our protagonist. Susan drives up to her sister's place on a mission to find those missing chapters. And of course, she gets sassy with the construction crew because she's our #plucky heroine. When Susan arrives at her sister, she's put in a bedroom which has a picture of her family when she and her sister were kids. Susan immediately turns over that photo so she doesn't have to look at it. Susan complains that Alan didn't like her in their first meeting, and after that they only really communicated by email. Is that true? Susan claims that the company could go out of business if they don't find the missing chapter. They're being sold to the conglomerate for Alan's existing novels plus his next novel, MAGPIE Murders, which if they don't have the missing chapters, they don't believe they can publish. Susan goes into the village. She sees Alan's lawyer, Shajid. She talks to James, and James tells her that Alan talked about Susan all the time, but never had anything nice to say about her. Susan tries to be her own detective, snooping around the grounds and looking at tire tracks. Later, she walks through a meadow and asks a Reverend if the meadow is called Dingle Dell, assuming it's the meadow in the book MAGPIE Murders. She tells her sister that she and Andreas aren't together. They're loosely connected. According to her sister, Susan only talks about work, never about herself. And there's something going on with their father. Their father was asking about Susan. He's not well after an aneurysm, but Susan doesn't want to see him. We mentioned we got to look at Susan's mental health. As she sleeps, the fictional character Atticus Apprentice visits her in a dream and tells her there are 3 possibilities. Alan slipped, Alan committed suicide, then consider the third. Susan goes back to London, but she tells her sister she'll be back. Susan claims that Alan was murdered, and in that suicide note he's talking about his book being finished, not his life. The answer's in the book. Susan's boyfriend, Andreas. He's trying to be supportive, but he's also being shady. Andreas is seeing Alan's lawyer, and Shajid says it's timely that Alan's death happened where Andreas was concerned. And Shajid hands Andreas an envelope with a check inside. We find out the name of the neighbor who wouldn't move their car in episode 1. It's Jack White, who's a property developer, and Alan hated him. We really get to know Alan's boyfriend/ex-boyfriend, James Taylor, in this episode. According to James, he met Alan on the internet site Rent Boys and charged £300 an hour. Now that Alan's murdered, James gets everything, and James can't wait to sell everything. James tells Susan that Alan went up to the top of the tower all the time. He liked the view. James says he was in London on the night Alan died because he and Alan weren't getting on anymore. James knows he's the character James Fraser in the book. James knows the password to Alan's computer. James is the one who says Susan should talk to Alan's sister Claire. Let's look at Claire Jenkins, who's also Sir Magnus Pye's sister Clarissa Pye in the book MAGPIE Murders. Claire helped Alan with his first 8 Atticus Apprentice novels. She would type them, proofread them, bind them, copy them. Now she lies to Susan about not having seen MAGPIE Murders. She claims her and her brother were close once, but after he became famous, she didn't know him anymore. Does say that Alan always wanted to be famous. She believes Alan jumped off the tower because he never wanted to write the Atticus Apprentice books, and the success and money from those books drove him mad. If Claire's lying about seeing the manuscript to MAGPIE Murders, what else is Claire lying about? Shajid Khan. He's been Alan's solicitor for years. He handled the contract about buying the big house, Abbey Grange. And he says he doesn't have a key to Abbey Grange. That seems to be true since he showed up and didn't walk into the house. And he also handled Alan's divorce from his wife, Melissa. Shajid said he's a big fan of Alan's books. Alan had recently decided to make a new will. He says their relationship wasn't social or friendly, and he didn't know about Alan's cancer. But he did say Alan told him he was going to base a character on him in the new novel. Shajid doesn't tell Susan about meeting with Andreas later. Is that lawyer-client confidentiality, or is it suspicious? Suffolk Police Detective Locke, who remember is Inspector Chubb in MAGPIE Murders. He is very upset to see Susan, and he claims that he's not investigating Alan's death because Alan's death was a suicide. He says he's friends with Claire Jenkins, Alan's sister, and Claire used to be married to a police officer, and Claire used to work at the police station in HR. He had met Alan Conway. He didn't mention any of this to Susan in episode 1. Locke wants to know if Susan told Claire about this suicide letter. Detective Chubb is apparently in 3 of the books, and they were all based on Locke. And as we see in MAGPIE Murders, Chubb is not the brightest bulb. We get a new character in the real-life story of Alan's death, and that's Susan's sister, Katie. She has a husband, Gordon, who's away in New York City. She has 2 kids, Jack and Amsterdam, and she has no idea where her daughter, Daisy, is. Katie couldn't go to New York with her husband because she's been made culture manager, which is 1 position below general manager, assistant to the general manager, at her workplace, the Garden Center. Katie uses the phrase, "just you and me against the world like we always were." She says she and her sister were inseparable until they were separated. Susan has not been in touch recently. Now, Katie knew Alan back when he was a teacher, but she says she hasn't seen him in 2 years. He never invited her to Abbey Grange, his new house. Is that true? She seems so close. One final thing we should note is the Reverend that Susan talks to in the meadow appears to be the vicar in MAGPIE Murders. Now let's go to Alan's novel, MAGPIE Murders, and look at our 2 victims in that story. We still have Mary Blakiston. By all accounts, she was devoted to her employer, Sir Magnus, perhaps because Sir Magnus was always supportive to her 2 sons. and she worked for Sir Magnus Pye for 20 years. We are teased a tragedy at the lake 12 years before this story takes place, so that would be 1943. And Atticus wonders, was Sir Magnus responsible for that tragedy? R.I.P. Sir Magnus Pye. He was killed 2 days after he returned home to his house, Pye Hall. We know that on the night he died, he says to someone, "I think you ought to leave." A sword is swung, his head is chopped off. He was killed around 9 p.m. The sword was taken from a suit of armor in his hallway. According to Atticus Apprentice, Sir Magnus was showing someone out of the house when he was struck with the sword, and that Sir Magnus met with someone in his office on the night that he died. The safe was open, monies and bonds and certificate are all in the safe, but none were taken. Now there was a fire in the fireplace, despite the fact it wasn't cold the night he died. In there we see a burnt note with no writing, but perhaps some blood. Sir Magnus and his wife arrived home from a holiday 2 days after Mary Blakiston's funeral, and he snidely says to his wife he didn't want to come back early from his vacation for the maid's funeral. Now it should be noted that 2 nights before the Pyes returned home, their house had been burgled, and if you do the math, aka that has to be the night of Mary Blakiston's funeral. Sir Magnus notes that Mary Blakiston would have been in the house to prevent a robbery. Robbery took some coins and some jewelry. Sir Magnus received a typed letter with a handwritten envelope attacking him for his plans to develop Dingle Dell, the meadow. The letter read, "You won't get away with it. The village was here before you, and it will be here after you are gone. Think again if you want to live here. Think again if you want to live." Sir Magnus planned to build a bunch of houses on the meadow, and the village was upset. He got many notes of people complaining. Now, I'm sure your ears pricked up when you hear that Sir Magnus received a handwritten envelope but a typed letter, the exact opposite of what Charles, the publisher, got from Alan Conway in real life. Let's look at our suspects in the novel. Lead detective Atticus Apprentice. He finds out about Sir Magnus's death in the newspaper. He does believe there's a connection between Mary Blakiston's death, who died on the stairs, and Sir Magnus's death, who had his head chopped off by a sword. Atticus felt he couldn't do anything about the rumors about Robert Blakiston being responsible for his mother's death, but he believes he can solve Sir Magnus's death because that is definitely murder. Atticus is writing a book, The Landscape of Criminal Investigation. His secretary James says, "I can't wait to read it." Atticus jokes, "The way things are going, you may end up having to write it." He still hasn't told James about his tumor. Poond believes that Sir Magnus knew his killer because of the way the blow was struck. James Fraser, aka James Taylor in real life, is the thick assistant, the Dr. Watson who can't figure things out. James points out that neither he nor Atticus knew Magnus Pye, and he doesn't even remember, or claims he doesn't remember, Joyce Underling coming into the office. When Atticus is interviewing Lady Frances Pye in her bedroom, James takes the initiative to leave. Why did he do that? There is a brief shot of Robert Blakiston in this episode, where you hear him saying, even though it's the voice of author Alan Conway, say, "If I said that I did, Mr. Pund," and what he's talking about is blame Sir Magnus for the tragedy at the lake 12 years prior, "would you accuse me of his murder?" What is Robert talking about? Sir Magnus Pye's sister Clarissa Pye, who remember is Alan's sister Claire Jenkins in real life. Clarissa Pye is Sir Magnus's twin sister. While he lives up in Pye Hall, she lives in kind of a dingy place in town. She's not a big fan of the Dingle Dell development project, and she told her brother not to develop it. According to the rules, if she had been born 5 minutes earlier, she'd have been the firstborn and gotten rights to Pye Hall and all the land and even Dingle Dell. But she wasn't. She's been kicked out of the house and now she lives in this place. Hey. We see Brent the gardener at Pye Hall. He was fired. Sir Magnus said he was worse than useless. Brent is there and watches Atticus Apprentice enter Pye Hall with Chubb and James. Sir Magnus is also frustrated that Brent wasn't around when Pye Hall was robbed. We have a brief, and I mean brief, shot of Mary Blakiston's ex-husband Matthew. Atticus wonders, did he want revenge on Mary and Sir Magnus? And Matthew Blakiston says, once again in Alan Conway's voice, "He took my wife and my family. He took everything I ever loved." We meet Sir Magnus's wife, Frances Pye, in this episode. She has a line, "One day I swear I'll put a knife in you, and I won't care if I hang for it. She complains to her husband that they should have come back sooner for the funeral, but Sir Magnus again cracked he didn't want to have to come home for his housekeeper's funeral. Frances points out that if they'd been home for the funeral, they would have been home when the house was robbed, and they could have prevented it. She's the one who discovers her husband's body when she got home around 10:45 that night. Remember, Sir Magnus was killed at 9 p.m. An important note is that when the phone rings, there's a clear shot of a phone next to her bed, but it doesn't work. According to her, none of the upstairs phones work. She hates Pye Hall, claims it sucks. Frances was in London when her husband died, kind of like how in real life James was in London when Alan died, and they were on their vacation when Mary Blakiston died. She doesn't believe Mary was murdered. She just thinks Mary fell down the stairs. She's the one who said Mary was obsessed with her husband. Claims Sir Magnus was no saint, and his behavior towards his servants was scandalous. He had no sense of decorum. About the safe, she says Sir Magnus is the only one who knew the combination. We have a brief scene with Sir Magnus Pye's son Frederick. Who's he played by? That's right, played by the actor who plays Alan's son Freddie in real life. Frederick wants to know when he'll have to go back to school, and he doesn't like funerals. Even though this is the funeral of your dad, Frederick, come on. Good old Inspector Chubb, a.k.a. Detective Locke from real life. He is a country bumpkin, you want to say? He's very impressed with Detective Atticus Apprentice. He looked into Mary Blakiston's death. He says she was vacuuming at the top of the stairs, tripped and fell. That's what killed her. Those are the clues this week. Lots of clues. They were coming fast and furious. Have you figured out who killed Alan Conway? Was Alan Conway killed? Have you figured out who killed Sir Magnus Pye? Who killed Mary Blakiston? Were either of them killed? Let's go to our detective to see what they think. Catfish, the clues were flying fast and furious in episode 2. What's your rating out of 10 for the second episode of MAGPIE Murders?
Well, Bubba, I'm going to give this 7, what I like to call double M's with triple S's.
Double M's, triple S's?
Yeah, multiple murders with 77 suspects. Okay. Last week I asked for more of the past so I could, so we could start figuring out who murdered somebody in the past. Thank you so much. So let me get more in the past. I'll get my bearings. I'll try to figure out who killed it. Way to go. There's another damn murder here, Bubba. I mean, I got the same chance as Chubb to solve any of these cases.
Oh, no.
Well, but you remember that TV show on Netflix called Dark, that great German sci-fi show? At the beginning of the episode, they had the pictures on the walls with the strings. Who's who. I'm going to need one of those, and then I'm going to need a bunch of cards to figure it out. I mean, this is not, Bob, I realized all I need to do is make sure that when I list my suspects every week, that by the time we get to the 6th podcast, I will have named every single suspect for every single murder so that at least one point I would have been right.
Okay, fair enough.
I now also suspect that no one is safe, and some of the people that I've already listed as suspects will also be killed, making me look even more stupid. I also predict the murder will be solved with the use of an anagram, and that is in no way a red herring. I'm serious about this. Anagrams.
Very interesting. What brought you to anagrams, Catfish?
Well, the anagram, somehow stupidly, Alan, he loves anagrams, and somehow even his boyfriend knew the password to his computer. Boy, for somebody who hates everybody, that was a surprise to me. But it is an anagram. His password is an anagram of Atticus Apprentice. And so I suspect anagrams, some people love anagrams. I'm horrible at them, just as I am at figuring out murders. But I suspect the use of an anagram will be important. Again, knowing nothing.
It makes me think of something. Now, I have read the book. I know if there have been murders, and if there have been, who might have committed them or who didn't commit them because they were accidents or suicide. I watched these first 2 episodes again closely. And there is a moment in the first episode and a moment in the second episode where if you're really looking for clues, you might want to freeze the TV, freeze the image, and you might get a clue.
Okay,
and let
great.
me say, I've included those shots in this video today. So if you watch this YouTube video
Holy
closely,
cow.
there could be times where you want to freeze frame it to see something that could help you out.
I would add a few more sections to things I want to talk about weekly.
Okay.
The first one is what I like to call triple M.
Triple M?
Yeah, amusing magpie moment. There were a couple, the runner-up amusing magpie moment was the super grieving Lady Pye. Pund says, "It must have been a great shock, Mrs. Pye," to which she says, "To come home and find your husband's head been decapitated?" You could say that, yes.
Those English people, they're very dry.
My favorite amusing magpie moment, though, for this episode was every time anyone ever said Dingle Dell. It made me laugh. It was a 5-year-old. I was like, why didn't they just call it Dingleberry Dell?
Did you imagine Susan will be walking through any grassy area? Is this Dingle Dell? Does anybody call this area Dingle Dell? Good work, Susan.
I just want someone to say to her, what idiot would call anything Dingle Dell?
Oh, now, come
All
on.
Right. So the second thing I'm going to do every week is my double A.
Double A?
Yeah, Atticus Apprenticeship, a.k.a. what I learned from Pund.
All right, here we go.
And what I learned tonight was, if it's murder, murder can be solved. I'm going to make one caveat to that, unless your name is Catfish or Chubb. Then you got no shot. And then, Bubba, I'm adding my red herring of the week. They're always trying to give us stuff that we're going to think, oh, this is important, and it turns out to be not connected to the murders at all. My red herring of the week, in other words, the thing that they're trying to get me to go look at the shiny thing, and I'm going, no, I don't believe it, is the check that Susan's husband gets.
Well, he's not her husband. He's her,
right.
Remember,
They're living
she even
apart.
says, she doesn't even call him her boyfriend to her sister. She says, we're loosely connected or something like that.
Yeah, sorry, her significant or insignificant other. He gets the check from the lawyer, who I'll have more to say about later. But take it from Catfish, that clue's got nothing to do with the murder.
Interesting. Everybody, you'll want to clip this time on YouTube.
Yeah.
Catfish, let's do some rapid fire things real quickly. We have some characters we see them in the real world, and then we see the character Alan made them to put them in their book, to put them in his book. Is there a favorite one of those that you love, the two characters, the contrast between them, that the take that Alan did on them by putting them in their novel? Any favorite character combo of real world person and the character Alan based on them?
You know, the funny thing is that the one that stands out is the one who's exactly the same, and that's the Triple S.
Triple S?
Yeah, Sad Sack Sister.
Oh.
I mean, he even goes so far as to use the same exact number on the door. Horrible. I loved her reaction when it's like, oh, no, I didn't know he put me in the novel, but he can be cruel. What?
Some of our listeners may not realize that you are an actor. You're currently in a major motion picture, which is out in theaters as we speak.
Yeah, and it might be gone from theaters by the time this podcast posts.
Yeah,
that is true.
Okay,
Oscar bait.
Now, Catfish, playing one of the characters where you get to be a real life character and then a character from the novel would be the best. Which of these characters, Locke and Chubb, the sister and the sister in real life, the sister in the novel, which character would you like to play as an actor? Which would be the most fun to play?
I want to be the murderer. The murderer. Whoever it is going to not only probably get to play two different characters in the past and in the present, but might have not just one, but two completely different reveals of their character. That means they get to play essentially 4 parts.
Well, let's not assume anything, but that's pretty interesting. So
I made that assumption last week, Bubba. I'm going with that.
I'm saying be careful about assumptions. Now, let's get to our typical questions. Was Alan Conway killed? Was it an accident? Was it suicide?
Bubba,
yeah.
Pund traveled through time and the ineffable boundary between fiction and real life to tell Susan what I already told listeners last week. This was no accident. It was a triple M.
Triple M.
Murder most meritorious. Yes. Yes. Even Alan's boyfriend tonight says what I said last week. People would have lined up and paid money. They could have had a bidding process to push Alan off the roof.
Right. They could have those stairs up to the tower. It'd be like, okay, give me your money. All right, haul him back up to the top. Well, if it was murder, then, Catfish, you've said you'd give us your top 3 suspects. Who are your top 3 suspects in Alan's death?
Bubba, my ass covering begins this week. By the end of podcast 5, I will have named all possible suspects, so I would have been right at least once. So my suspects this week are all new, Bubba. My number 3 suspect is Septuple S.
Septuple S?
Yeah, sassy smoking Susan's suspiciously sipping sister.
Ooh,
she says,
okay.
And when have you seen him? Susan says to her sister, when was the last time you see him? And she's like, let me have a little water. Oh, no, it was 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, my ass. She did it because she hated her sister almost as much as Alan hated his own sister, and she wants to ruin her sister's life.
Whoa. Okay. Now that is somebody I didn't see, but this is very much ass covering if you're naming Susan's sister Katie as your number 3 suspect. Okay. Who's your number 2 suspect?
All right, Bubba. So for real, last week we talked about I made the supposition, the assumption, which you've chided me for tonight, that the person playing the character who's a murderer in the past will be the same person playing the character who murders in the present. And not only that, we saw more parallels tonight. The written letter, the typewritten envelope. So the present and the past murders details cannot be coincidental. Punt agrees on this. He knows his feelings have been very clear on coincidences, and I have the same feeling. So it is inescapable logic, Bubba. Tell me where I'm wrong. I am concluding that from now on, my suspect list will be restricted to the following group of people. People who have read this book already, the one that Alan doesn't show to anybody, keeps it under lock and key. No one gets to see it. The murderer must be someone who has either already read the book so that they can do these parallels, or there's a separate group of people that it could be, and it's any of the people who wrote the book. So it's going to be, I said last week it wasn't suicide. It could be suicide. All right. So that's my number 2 suspect, Alan. Why did he do it? I said last week he was too full of himself to do it. The only reason he would do it is to try to get everybody in trouble. And in his last FU, he never even finished the book. Now, I don't believe that he didn't finish the book. I believe, as Susan comes to the conclusion tonight, the finale is the last chapter of the book is key. Why is it? Because it exactly mirrors what happened in the book. It's going to be the same person. That's the real thing. Number 1 suspect tonight, Shajid, the lawyer. He loves Alan books. He was even more excited to read this one because he found out that a character was based on him in this one. He had access to the house. And knowing how Alan portrays his acquaintances in the books, Shajid got it. He read it. He identified himself, and he became enraged, but then calmly and coolly took down Alan using the details of the book.
The one thing I really do love that you realize is that, wait a minute, in the book, somebody wrote an envelope but sent a typed letter. But then for Alan's suicide, he wrote a letter and then sent it in a typed envelope. That can't be a coincidence. There's something going on there for sure. I mean, and I would think like you would.
Yeah.
Alan is the type of character who could really think he's so smarter than everybody else. He'll be like, these morons will never solve this, and stage his own death. So I like that thought.
It is a thought. It controverts what I thought last week. It's very tricky to try to get everybody in trouble and enrage everybody by doing this. The only thing that it takes out is his chance to make fun of everybody if the book is released. Now, Bubba.
Yeah.
So in one way, I'm covered myself. I'm going to list everybody as a suspect. That way, at one point, I'm right. But I'm going to put myself on the line here, Bubba. I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to do it for our listeners so that they can have the receipts and make fun of me later. Every week, I'm going to have what I call a quadruple C.
Quadruple C?
Yeah, catfish, clear conscience, cross out. I'm going to eliminate for good a suspect. I can never make them a suspect again.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Be careful.
So that means every week someone's going to be cleared by catfish. I'm going to have a clear conscience, and one of these people I cleared is for sure the murderer. So here's tonight's quadruple C. For Alan, it is Susan. She's got too much writing on the book. She wouldn't have killed him until she found the ending, and if she had found the ending, she wouldn't be trying so hard to talk to everybody to find it. I've already caused myself problems because I didn't suspect her last week, so if it's her, I'm doubly screwed, okay? I am feeling what I like to call the triple P.
The triple P?
Yeah, the prescient power of Pund. It is not Susan. It is not Susan. She's the one behind all this. She's the one a la Christmas Death Story that Pund appeared to. So it is not her. She's a cross out, Bubba.
That's our real life murder. Catfish, we've got 2 more to get to.
Oh, my God.
Let's get to the novel. Was Mary Blakiston, the maid found at the bottom of the stairs, was she killed? Was it an accident? Was it suicide?
It was clearly triple M, Bubba.
Wait, triple M?
Murder most messy. Because she was a maid and no one was there to clean it up. It's murder most messy.
Okay, so who are your top 3 suspects in Mary Blakiston's death?
All right. First of all, this is I want to get credit for this. I'm going to be right about this at the end. I'm going to play your silly little game. But the answer to this question is clearly Alan Conway. But I'll play your little game. All right.
Okay.
Number 3 is Magnus. Inspector Chubb says Magnus was always supportive of her and her 2 sons. You mean Magnus and her sons. The sons they had together.
Okay.
Suspect 2, Lady Pye. See reason for suspect number 3. She found out about the information.
She didn't like how he acted around the help, that's for sure.
Number 1, I'm going to stay with the neighbor, Bubba. The neighbor's still on my list. He was the only one I had last week. I have no reason to take him off.
Well, we don't know yet who he is in the novel, but that's a great point. We know he's in the novel, but we don't know who he is. Perfect. Okay.
For this, I am going to take off Chubb. Chubb did not do it.
Oh, you don't think the killer detective who is quick to say, "Oh, Atticus, it's not murder. It's not murder." So you're saying he's not evil and trying to throw Atticus Pund off the case, and Chubb didn't do it? Okay.
Chubb, I want to make this very clear. Chubb did not kill Mary Blakiston. He's been cleared by catfish. Double C, cleared by catfish.
We had somebody new pass away in this episode. In the story, we have Sir Magnus Pye, who was decapitated. Was it an accident? Was it suicide?
I mean, for God's sakes, he just died. But I'm going to do this, Bubba. I'm going to rule out suicide in this double D.
Double D?
Yeah, decapitation death. It was clearly a triple M.
All right, hold on. There was murder most messy. Is it that again?
Murder most dismembered. Bub, I'm running out of these and we're already in episode 2. We're only in episode 2.
Okay, well, then who are your suspects in Sir Magnus Pye's death?
All right, number 3, Lady Pye. See above.
All right.
Number 2, the local NIMBY group. He was going to build everything up. It's the local NIMBY group.
You're not building in my Dingle Dell.
No, Dingle Dell, done. And my number 1 suspect for the death of Magnus Pye, It's Double D.
Double D?
Our dim detective. Yes, that's right. It's Chubb. Now, look, I told you he didn't do the first one, but I'll tell you why he did the second. Because after the first murder, they put out a real good spread. They had some tea and some crumpets. And so he's like, oh, my God, every time I come here for a murder, they put on everything good. So he didn't do the first one, but he did the second one.
Catfish, we've invited all of our listeners to follow along and get in on their detecting. And let's get to their feedback right now. First up is Rochelle, who wrote, wait, James Taylor is Alan Conway's ex? I thought he was just his assistant.
Well, no, both.
Yeah, he was both. That's true. BT Dubs, I am glad we didn't have to wait until Only Murders in the Building is back on TV to meet again, Double P. Oh, well, thank you so much. We love solving murders together, Rochelle.
You know that Catfish solved season 1. Somehow.
Season 1.
I mean, only because I came up with the most ridiculous answer, and it was the right answer. So maybe I'll do the same thing again.
We love it. Rochelle, give us your top 3 suspects in all these deaths. We got this feedback from Karen. Catfish, what's it say?
It says, I was pleasantly surprised on how quickly I was hooked into the show. My 3 guesses are the ex-boyfriend, the sister, and the son. Those are very good guesses.
They are.
Very good guesses. I suspect he planned to kill himself, but someone beat him to the punch.
Ooh, I like that.
Always writes his drafts in his handwriting and typed his final copy. I suspect he was not ready to die just yet when someone murdered him. He would have typed the suicide note, so whoever killed him typed the envelope because someone would have noticed a different handwriting. The editor keeps saying it did not sound like him, which makes me believe it was a draft, but who knows? I am no pund.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Karen, that is great. That's pretty great detective work, I think.
That's pretty good. They did come up kind of an alternate reasoning for the letter tonight. But Karen, very close.
Okay, we got this feedback from Christina, who said, OMG, this book, and she's talking about the real life novel this show is based on, was so boring. It took me months to finish reading it.
Oh.
I normally have to finish a book once I start reading, and there have been only 2 books I've never finished. That's the only reason I finished this book. It's supposed to be a murder mystery book, but there's absolutely no suspense at all. Not with the fake story or the real story. It's very slow moving and a little racist when talking about different people, like Susan's Greek boyfriend. Ooh. So Christina didn't enjoy the book. We don't know necessarily how she feels about the show. What do you think, Catfish?
I hope we can get some feedback from her. I'm assuming that one of the books she never finished was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because that book was also very boring.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Hey, read that next bit, Catfish.
All right. Luca Cunningham says, here are my theories. In the 1950s, Joy killed Mary Blakiston. I don't know why, but I believe how. During the night, Joy suspiciously asked Robert to stay at her house. Why? Because she didn't want to witness when Joy killed his mother. Maybe Mary didn't allow Robert's marriage to her. In the 2020s, I believe whoever's playing Joy in the book killed Alan Conway. The reason is that real-life Joy may have committed a murder in her past. That's why Alan added that tragedy that took place 12 years before. That's why real-life Joy took the chapter, then killed Alan so he wouldn't rewrite it. I'm completely now even more confused than I was before. So thank God you are on the case. Top 3 suspects, 1950s, Freddie Pye, Clarissa Pye, Joy Sanderling. 2020s, Freddie Conway, James Taylor, Detective Inspector Locke. Ooh.
Man, the listeners, you are doing some great detective work. I am very, very impressed. We do have one final bit of feedback from our Double P.
Double P.
Podcast partner. It's Double M Matt Murdoch, who's watching along, and he's got his top 3 suspects. He says in Alan Conway's death, his number 1 suspect is Alan's sister. His number 2 suspect is Alan's ex, James. And his number 3 suspect is his neighbor. And Matt adds that is perhaps the neighbor perhaps killed Alan accidentally.
I will wager everything, Bubba, that whoever killed Alan Conway did it intentionally and with great joy.
All right. His top 3 suspects in the MAGPIE murders is, once again, he goes with Joy Sunderling, the fiance of the son of Mary Blakiston. Number 2, he's got Sir Magnus Pye's sister. So he's got the sister in his top 2 positions in both settings. And he says, number 3, he says, whoever killed the other 2 that Pund is alluding to in a passage where we hear Alan writing. and he thinks maybe we haven't met a character yet. Ooh,
Oh,
these are
man.
great detectives we have listening. Listeners, you've heard this detecting. We want you in on this. If you're following along, if you're trying to solve this at home, solve it with us. In YouTube, go down in those comments. Tell us your top 3 suspects, your theories. Why was Alan killed, if he was killed? Why was Mary killed, if she was killed? Why was Sir Magnus killed? He was probably killed. I mean, suicide decapitation is pretty tough. Or you can reach out to us on social media. That's at @PHQ. The word double, the single letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters, at @PHQ on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/PHQ. Email hello@doublepmedia.com. We're going to end this podcast with a question that wraps up our thoughts. So Alan Conway, he would describe people and make them characters in his novel. That was not nice. If Alan put you in his novel, how would he describe your character in his book?
This morose, overweight actor wannabe who failed at everything in life. I mean, he's just going to slam you. He's just going to take everything.
Right. He's going to say this redneck who barely has any hair and doesn't bother to comb it for the podcast is out here trying to connect with people and says his Twitter handle every 5 minutes at @PHQ. That's my character in Alan's book. Hey, if you're going to be in an Alan Conway novel, what's he going to say about you? Once again, go down in the YouTube comments or at @PHQ us. You can find me, Bubba, on Twitter. And if you want to talk to me, you can reach me at FitandTrim. That's FITTENTRIM, at FitandTrim on Twitter.
And I am Catfish. You can hit me up at CJGman67 on Twitter.
And you'll hear us next time after episode 3. Let's solve Magpie Murders.